Hi, this is Shupriyo and the Economic Survey 2019-20. It is a very important document that we need to cover for the RBI Grade B exam and all of the other exams like NABARD, SEBI, etc. So it is actually presented in two volumes. So volume 1, it deals with the policy implications. So what is the chief economic advisor telling the government to do? That's all about part 1. And for part 2, it's mostly about statistics and about the current economic situation, etc. etc. So part 1 is far more important to us, although we need to learn both parts, part 1 and 2. So in this video, I will cover the first 3 chapters of part 1 of the economic survey. So let's begin with part 1 of the Economic Survey of India. So I have the Economic Survey 2019-20 document in front of me. This is volume 1 of the Economic Survey. So before we begin, we need to understand who prepares the Economic Survey of India. So the Economic Survey of India, it is prepared by the Chief Economic Advisor of India. Currently, it is Krishnamurthy V. Subramaniam. So he has prepared this document, but it is prepared in consultation with the Finance Ministry. So the government gives its inputs and then it is prepared. So Nirmala Sitharaman, she actually tables this document and presents it in front of both the houses of the parliament in the budget session. So basically she does this on the day before the budget is tabled. So it is on January 31st of 2020 that she presented this document. She tabled this document. And we also need to understand why are we learning this. So the Economic Survey of India, from this document, we cannot expect that questions will directly come. So for example, in the RBI Grade B 2020 exam, you cannot expect that there will be direct questions lifted out of the economic survey. That would make things a lot easier, but that doesn't happen. So how will this document help you? Well, it will really help you in the descriptive section of the RBI Grade B exam, because in the descriptive section there are various economic concepts asked, and you can pick up things that you learned over here and you can apply it there. And it will also help you in the interview, and there might be a few questions, maybe 1 marker or 2 marker, that might come in phase 1 or in phase 2, but direct questions will be very limited. But this does not mean that the importance of this document is reduced. It is actually a very important document, and I urge every one of you to go ahead and read the entire document. You can easily find it online. It's 300 pages, yes, and it can get a little bit complicated, but I will be making it very simple for you. So after you watch this video, go ahead and read the chapters that I will talk about in this video. It will help you so much, and this entire document is very important because it will help you to understand about the economy of India, about what's happening right now. So without any further ado, let's begin with the Economic Survey 2019-20 Volume 1. And now, as I told you, it is prepared by the Chief Economic Advisor. I'll just read out the chapters that we have this time. So the chapter 1 is Wealth Creation, the Invisible Hand supported by the Hand of Trust. So basically, the Economic Survey 2019-20, the theme of this survey is wealth creation. So that's the important theme. So wealth creation and how the invisible hand of the market is helping to create wealth, and also how the trust in the economy that is built by the government between all of the stakeholders, how that trust is also helping with the wealth creation. So wealth creation is at the center stage of this survey. It is the crucial, the most important thing. And so that's about chapter 1. Then chapter 2, we have talk about entrepreneurship and wealth creation at the grassroots level. Then chapter 3, it deals with pro-business versus pro-crony. So those are the things regarding creative destruction, wealth creation, etc. etc. And chapter 4 will be undermining markets. So when government intervention will be hurting some things in the market, that is said in that chapter. And chapter 5 will be creating jobs and growth by specializing to exports in network products. So that's about the global value chains, about the job creation things, and which industries should India actually specialize in. Then we have targeting ease of doing business in India, and of course you know that EODB has been a center focus of our government, and it's a very important chapter as well. Then we have the golden jubilee of bank nationalization. So he talks about the nationalization of the banks and the impact that it has had on the economy. Then we have chapter 8 the financial fragility in the NBFC sector. Then we have the privatization and wealth creation. We have the chapter 10 as is India's GDP growth rate overstated. So there's a good analysis, and there's a lot of econometrics in this chapter. Too much of it is not required for us, but we will be reading about what the central conclusion is. And then we finally have Thalinomics. So if you remember Raghuram Rajan, he used to talk about Dosanomics, right? And here they have actually talked about Thalinomics. So the economics of a plate of food in India. So it's also a quite interesting chapter. So as we begin this survey, you must understand a few things, which is that this survey, I will be talking about 3 chapters, the first 3 chapters in this video. So I will be making everything quite easy for you so that you can grasp it. So my main motivation is to help you read. So you have to read this document, even though I will be covering everything. So if you don't have time, you can just rely on my video. However, I would still tell you, like I told you, the reasons why you should be reading this document. So let's begin with the first part, the preface. So in the preface, the CEA, he just mentioned Adam Smith. So Adam Smith, as you know, he is called the father of modern economics, and he had written a book called An Enquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. So this is the most important and central work of Adam Smith, and there he had many fundamental questions like what causes wealth and prosperity of nations. So this is the central theme about economics that Adam Smith had brought into the forefront. And with this thing, the chief economic advisor tells us that India is aspiring to become a $5 trillion economy by 2025. So what are the things required for us to get to that level? How can we become a $5 trillion economy by 2025? Then he goes ahead and talks about the market economy. So both in economic thinking and policy making, how can the markets help us to reach this goal? Because the government cannot help to reach this goal alone, right? So we need the market as well. And then he talks about Kautilya's Arthashastra and Thiruvalluvar's Thirukural. So these are both ethical wealth creation and economics books, actually ancient Indian books, and they actually talk a lot about the ancient Indian philosophy, which is also talked about in quite a few chapters here. And the survey's conceptualization of wealth creation, it actually has a synthesis of the old and the new. So basically the survey says that both the old and the new things should be taken together so that India can move forward. So the ancient Indian traditions, they need to be used with the contemporary things or the use of fintech in our public sector banks. So old and the new, they must go together so that we can have a good development. And another important line that they have mentioned is that the survey conveys synthesis as well with the lavender of the new 100 rupee note coming together with one of the older currency notes of rupees 100. So the survey, the color that they have chosen to print, so that conveys a meaning as well that you need to understand. And the survey goes ahead and talks about eliminating policies that undermine markets. So there is also a need to integrate assemble in India into make in India. So one of the chapters will be going in depth into it, and there is a need to focus on labor intensive exports and thereby create jobs at large scale. So for India, we need to focus on sectors which have a lot of labor intensive needs. So we have a lot of people in our economy. We can use our economies of scale and we can effect a good change in these sectors. And then the survey also talks about the GDP growth estimates. Many people had questioned whether it was actually legitimate or not, but the survey goes ahead and argues that our GDP growth estimates can be trusted. And of course, as I told you, they also talk about Thalinomics, and this is how they are going to relate economics to the common person using something that he or she encounters every day, which is a plate of food, that is a thali. So that is all about the preface, and we are going to move into the first chapter now. So the first chapter, okay, so the first chapter is wealth creation, the invisible hand supported by the hand of trust. So what is this invisible hand that they are talking about? The invisible hand is the hand of the market. So the markets, how they are shaping the economy, how they are helping us to develop, to move forward, and for the prosperity, the wealth creation to happen in our economy. So the survey says that for more than 3/4 of known economic history, India has been a dominant economic power globally. So they are trying to tell us about the ancient India, about how we were a huge economic center. Many of you might have already read about the various books which list this. So India used to be a huge economic superpower, and now what has happened is we have been relegated to the background, but finally we are catching up. So basically they also talk about the exponential rise in India's GDP and GDP per capita post liberalization, which coincides with wealth generation in the stock market. So the wealth generation of the stock market, that is actually correlated with the GDP and the GDP per capita. So all of these three things are rising together. So there is a lot of benefit that accrues from enabling the invisible hand of the market. And then the survey goes ahead and talks about this $5 trillion economy thing. So this is a central focus of this survey. They will be mentioning this a lot of the times, that by 2025 we need to become a $5 trillion economy. So we need to strengthen the hand of the markets together with the hand of trust. So to do these two things, they need to be strengthened together so that we can achieve this $5 trillion economy. So how can we do this actually? So we can provide equal opportunities for new entrants, enable fair competition and ease of doing business. So this is the first thing. The second thing is eliminate policies that undermine markets through government intervention even when it is not necessary. So the government should not interfere unnecessarily. Third thing is enable trade for job creation, and fourth is the efficiently scale up the banking sector to be proportionate to the size of the economy, the Indian economy. So basically the survey says that our banking sector, it is quite small. So it's important that the banking sector becomes a bit larger so that we can go ahead and achieve all the goals that we have set for us. Now regarding the importance of wealth creation, so basically they have a graph over here. So the global contribution to world's GDP by major economies. So in this, what they are showing is that India used to have a huge very important contribution to the world's GDP earlier on. So in this part of the graph, as you can see, this is the thing for India. So you see that India had a huge amount of contribution to world GDP, but as you come down to this side, just see this part. So this part, as you can see, India, the contribution has gone down. So the survey is saying that we used to have a huge amount of contribution to the international GDP. So we can go ahead and get that in the future as well. So the survey also says that India had deviated from the model for several decades after independence. So this wealth creation model that we used to have, that we used to always talk about, so we had a little bit deviated from this model after our independence, because we had actually done what? Because Nehruvian economics, that was a little bit towards socialism, right? So in this survey, you have to understand, this is a very important and a central theme of the survey. The survey says that capitalism is the solution. Capitalism is what we should push towards, and we should strengthen the markets. We should strengthen trust as well. So we cannot go ahead and foray into socialism. So socialism will not help us to become a $5 trillion economy. So that is a central theme that you need to understand, that the survey talks about again and again. And so they are saying that after independence, we went downhill a little bit, but India returned back to these roots post-economic liberalization in 1991. So we had the BOP, the balance of payments crisis, in 1991. After that, we actually made some reforms, and then we had some exponential rise in the GDP and GDP per capita. We also had a lot of rise in the stock market as well. So the survey says that the SENSEX, it has not only grown after 1991, but it has grown at an accelerating pace. So the first incremental 5,000 points, it took over 13 years from its inception in 1986. The time taken to achieve each incremental milestone has substantially reduced over the years. And the survey has said that it is not due to the base effect, but it is due to the CAGR. Now, what is the base effect?
The base effect is basically that whenever there is a rise in any kind of quantity in economics, they talk about the base effect. The base effect means that if in the previous year the value was quite low and the value increases suddenly, so they say that it is due to the base effect, that the base was lower. But the survey is saying that this growth that we had, it's not due to the base effect, it's due to the cumulative annual growth rate. So the SENSEX growth that we had, it is actually something that is due to the cumulative annual growth rate. So it is something positive, and they will be talking about this in the other chapter as well. We'll go a little bit deeper into it. So the next thing is the incremental months taken for SENSEX to reach each 5,000 point milestone. I'll talk about this graph when we get to that chapter. The next thing is about the wealth created by the entrepreneur and how this correlates with different stakeholders. So the survey says that if wealth is created by an entrepreneur, it correlates strongly with benefits that accrue to the employee. So this graph, what it shows is that wealth creation that is made by the entrepreneur, this actually helps the employees to get a lot of salary as well. So as you can see, the trend line is towards the upside in this graph. So this means that when the wealth is created, the employees are also getting richer. And the survey also says that wealth creation by the entrepreneur, it correlates strongly with raw materials procured by the entrepreneur's firms, which proxies the benefits that suppliers reap. So if the entrepreneur is succeeding, then his suppliers are also going to succeed, right? Like if a business, if a manufacturing plant, if it succeeds, what will happen? It will go ahead and take more raw materials, it will order more things from suppliers, so it will help the suppliers to grow as well. So all these capital expenditures, it will also help the manufacturers of capital equipments. So as you can understand, if the wealth creation of the entrepreneurs are increasing, all of these stakeholders, they are going to get benefited. And this is the thing that they are actually showing in these graphs, that wealth creation by the entrepreneur, it is driving the benefits of suppliers, driving the benefits of the capital goods producers, and etc, etc. And also they are saying that if the wealth creation is happening by the entrepreneurs, revenues earned in foreign exchange will also be increasing, and then India's current account deficit, it will come into manageable levels, and we will have more foreign exchange earnings. So what will this do? This will actually help us to decrease the current account deficit. Our forex reserves will go up. So this will you can see over here in this graph. So wealth creation and forex revenues, that is also increasing. So if the entrepreneur is succeeding, all of these people are going to be succeeding. And also another thing is that the wealth created by entrepreneurs, it helps the country's common citizens as well. So all the common citizens of a country, they are also going to be benefited if the wealth created is actually increasing. And the survey has also found a strong correlation of wealth creation by entrepreneurs to the taxes paid. So you can see over here in this graph that the direct tax inflows are increasing because of the wealth creation as well. And the next thing that the survey talks about is the philosophy of the invisible hand. So this invisible hand, this is basically they are talking about the dalliance with socialism that we had. So earlier India wanted a little bit of socialism, socialist growth, but for 4 decades we had this under Nehru and the subsequent prime ministers. But this model, it is actually not sustainable. So the survey says that we should go into an invisible hand of the markets, so that will help us a lot more. And the survey says that our model, this stakeholder model, it actually existed earlier also, because in Arthashastra it is also written that the entrepreneurs, workers and consumers, they share the prosperity in that as well. So the thing is that the wealth creation, it should always go ahead by the market driven philosophy, not the socialistic philosophy. And that is why here you can see over here, this is very, very important. The survey says that the main theme, overarching theme of Economic Survey 2019-20 is wealth creation and the policy choices that enable the same. So that is the main theme that is in this document. And the next thing that they're talking about is that since 1991 there have been increasing economic openness, and the sectors that were liberalized, they grew significantly faster than those that remained closed. So this is very important, because when the people can exercise free choice, when the citizens can exercise free choice, there is a lot of competition in the market, and as the competition competition increases, the economic growth also increases. So they have shown this via various graphs. So one of the graphs is the increase in domestic credit to GDP after entry of private sector banks. So you can see over here in this graph, over here is the entry of private banks. So once the private banks entered the economy, the domestic credit to GDP, it actually shot up. As you can see, the trend line, it goes way up, because the private sector, they came in and they said, okay, we will be giving cheap loans, we will be giving loans to everybody, and then the credit to GDP ratio, it actually increased so much. And also the growth in the mutual funds sector after opening up in 2003. So as you can see in 2003 when it was opened up, so this actually trend line also goes up. So it means that when the markets are liberalized, when there is a policy that the free market will drive growth, then we have a huge spike in the growth. And that is what these graphs are all telling you. So these are not so much important. Let's go to the next section. So the next section talks about the wealth creation instruments. So enhancing efficiency, this is one of the crucial tools for wealth creation. So we need to have increased efficiency and equal opportunity. So equal opportunity for new entrants is very important, because as you can see, like this is a very important statistic, and later on they will also mention this in the survey, that a 10% increase in new firms in the district yields a 1.8% increase in the GDDP, which is the gross domestic district product. So each and every district, they are actually helped a lot when this kind of wealth creation is followed. And the next thing is that new firm creation, it has actually gone up significantly since 2014. So the survey says that since 2014, the new government has been a pro-business government. And so firm creation has actually increased quite a lot. So there they have given a stat that 70,000 new firms were created in 2014. And the number has grown by about 80% to about 1,24,000 new firms in 2018. So this is a very important statistic that you need to remember, that 1,24,000 new firms have been set up in 2018. So this is very important. As you can see that entrepreneurial activity, this is actually increasing GDDP. So as you can see, GDDP is increasing, and the distribution of the new firms across the districts. Now the survey also talks about the distribution of these firms. So they are saying that the distribution of the firms, it is actually widespread and not only in one area. So that is also something that is quite positive. And the survey says that new entrants to any kind of sector, they bring path-breaking ideas. So it is very important that we have a pro-business policy so that we can have new entrants into the market. And the survey says that India's aspiration to become a $5 trillion economy depends critically on promoting pro-business policies that provide equal opportunity for new entrants. Now, as we talked about it, that if the new entrants are there in an economy, then it will help with new ideas, with new ways of servicing customers, and then you and I, we will be benefited, and ultimately the GDP of the country is going to grow. And then the survey talks about the various phases of the SENSEX. So regarding this, the phases thing, so it's in another chapter, so I'll not be going into it right now. I'll talk to you when we get to that chapter. So there are various phases that the SENSEX was going through. And the next thing is that unlike in command economies where prices are determined by the government, in a market economy, price of good is determined by the interaction of the forces of supply and demand. So in a market economy, the demand and supply, that is matched by the market itself. So the government does not need to interfere. And another efficiency thing that the survey talks about, it's the allocation of resources. So they are saying that since resources are limited, a nation has to make choices. For example, given its demographic dividend, should India focus on labor intensive industries or capital intensive industries? Because it is a choice, we cannot do both. So in the survey they answer this question later on, and they are saying that we need to focus on labor intensive industries, which will actually help us. And they also talk about using assemble in India, which is a very important concept. They want to bring it into the Make in India. So Make in India will also have assemble in India, which will help us to create 4 crore well-paid jobs by 2025 and 8 crore by 2030. And even though we have had a substantial leap in the World Bank's ease of doing business, so this is very important. We used to have a rank of 142 in 2014. Now we have 63 in 2019. However, India can still improve the ease of doing business. And the survey also talks about one very important aspect, that we have not had an all-around improvement. So basically, even though the ease of doing business rankings, they have said that India is one of the 10 most improving democracies, one of the 10 most improving countries in the world in EODB. However, even though we are actually rising a lot, we need to reach the top 50. So that should be our goal, that we should be in the top 50 economies. And also the survey tells us that India continues to trail in parameters such as ease of starting business, registering property, paying taxes, and enforcing contracts. So these are the things that are actually lacking in ease of doing business in India. So we need to have a more uniform approach. We need to improve these parameters. So chapter 6 identifies the most crucial issues plaguing India's performance beyond the approach taken by the World Bank survey. So in chapter 6 we are going to read about those things. And the next thing is that historically in the last 50 years the top 5 economies have always been supported by their banks. So the contribution of the banking sector, the financial sector to the GDP, that has to be substantial. So the survey says that in the US this was well documented, because US has become an economic superpower due to its banks. Now in Japan also, when in the 80s Japan used to be very important. So at that point of time Japan had 15 of the top 25 largest banks. So can you understand, all the banks, they are actually very important for us to have a huge GDP growth and to have a huge importance in the global field. And right now the survey says that 4 of the largest banks right now, they are all Chinese banks, and the largest bank in the world, which is the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, it is nearly 2 times as big as the 5th or the largest or 6th largest bank, which are Japanese and American banks respectively. So as you can see, like China is a huge thing in the global economy, and you can see clearly that 4 of the biggest banks are there, and ICBC is such a huge bank. So the survey says that India's banking sector, it needs to grow because it is disproportionately underdeveloped, and India has only 1 bank in the global top 100. So can you imagine, like we have only 1 bank in the global top 100. So this is the same as like Finland, Denmark, Norway, Austria, Belgium. So these are the countries which are so small and they have 1 bank. So why should we only have 1 bank? We should have more than 1 bank, right? And the survey also says that as PSBs account for 70% of the market share in Indian banking, the onus of supporting the Indian economy and fostering its economic development falls on them. So it falls on the PSBs, and the chapter actually suggests some solutions that can make PSBs more efficient, a later chapter, so that we can actually have a lot more contribution of the PSBs towards our GDP. And the survey also talks about the shadow banking sector. So they are actually penetrating in areas where the traditional banking sector is unable to penetrate. And chapter 9 of the survey, they are actually talking about the efficiency gains that can be that can be acquired by having private sector companies run the businesses instead of the government. So the government is not very good at running the businesses, or that is what the conception of the survey is, and that is why the survey says that we should have less government bodies and we should have more privatization. So there is a lot of push in the privatization argument as well by this survey later on. And another thing, that interesting thing that they have pointed out, is the comparison of stock prices of BPCL and HPCL. So later on they will be talking about it in a later chapter. So basically, when it was announced that BPCL is going to have divestment, that time you can see, so this blue line over here, this is the BPCL line. So as you can see, the stock price of BPCL, it increased quite a lot just after they announced the disinvestment. However, the HPCL prices, they have not moved, they have remained actually static. So the survey says that because the sentiment of the stock market is also driven by these things, that privatization is going to lead to efficiency gains, and so the share price goes up. And the survey says that this stock market rise has actually led to 33,000 crore increase. So this is an unambiguous increase in BPCL's overall firm value. and this is an increase in national wealth as per the standards of the survey. And another thing is regarding the overestimation of GDP. So many people had alleged that the government is overestimating its GDP growth. So the survey says that no, there is no overestimation. They have gone into like pages and pages of econometrics, which is not quite important to us. It's only important to know the final result, that it's a legitimate thing. And the next thing is about the plate of nutritious food. I told you, the thali. So we are going to go into another chapter where it is actually said. And the next thing is the corruption perception index, which the Transparency International tracks. So across countries, India, it had its lowest point in this ranking in recent years in 2011. So since 2013, India has improved significantly in the index. So it shows, like in this graph you can see corruption perception index for India, it is actually getting a better ranking. India is getting a better ranking. So the trust deficit that we used to have, this has actually been reduced quite a lot. And the survey also talks about the discretionary allocation of natural resources before 2014, which had led to rent seeking by the beneficiaries. So right now, after 2014, we have eliminated opportunities for such rent seeking behavior. So that is also something that is positive. Now in the economic survey, there are various boxes, so huge boxes like these things. So in this box, what they have talked about, trust as a public good. So Aristotle and Kautilya versus Machiavelli. So Aristotle and Kautilya, they argued that trust should be there, that moral code is superior. However, as you know, this Machiavelli, he was actually an Italian politician, diplomat. So he wrote that morality is not so much important, that you need to go to the end goal. So the survey says that Aristotle and Kautilya, they were right and Machiavelli was not right. So basically this is very important. So trust within an economic activity, there is no such thing as trust, is what the Machiavellian people had actually advocated. However, they go into a lot of discussion, and finally they go ahead and talk about Kautilya's books. So in Kautilya's books, what the survey says is that in Kautilya's book, it explicitly presents its intellectual framework right in the beginning by stating that good governance is based on the following branches of knowledge: Varta, economic policy; Dandaniti, law and enforcement; Anvishiki, philosophical and ethical framework; and Trai, which is cultural context. So as you can understand that this Anvikshiki, this is the philosophical and ethical framework. So even Kautilya back then, he said that philosophy, it's quite important that we have ethics in the market. So without ethics, we cannot go ahead and have a good growth. And Adam Smith also actually agreed to this, because Adam Smith, he did not just advocate the invisible hand, but he also advocated the mutual sympathy, that is trust. So trust is very important. And in the global financial crisis as well, we saw that it's a glaring instance of the failure of trust in a market economy. So because there was a failure of trust, there was such a huge crisis. So morality is very important when we are talking about economic growth. That is the main message of this entire box. And about the loan defaults, so basically in chapter 4, they are talking about large corporations that willfully default on their loans. We'll get to that chapter later on. And it's actually something that is an issue in India right now, and we need to have some good measures to correct this. And regarding the audit failures as well, this is also something that the survey talks about. So what they say is that just as farmers burning the stubble create negative externalities for all citizens through the contaminated air, when a corporate intentionally misreports financial information, it harms investors by creating a negative externality of low trust for all domestic and international investors. So whenever a corporate is actually not paying off the loan, is actually willfully defaulting, so it hurts the trust, and then it hurts all the companies and the entire economy in the long run. And so when a corporate willfully defaults on its loans, it harms its bank and creates negative externality to all other corporates, as they get lesser supply of credit because of the lack of trust. So because of the lack of trust, there is a less amount of loans that are given to the legitimate companies as well. So that is all about these graphs and everything that they have written over here. And the next thing is, the survey talks that in June 2017, RBI had actually just identified 12 companies which constituted 25% of India's NPS. Now, the accounting quality of the large listed NPS, it was found to be much below the median accounting quality of other similarly listed corporates in 2012, 13 and 14. So this is very important to note, because it means that the auditing at these companies was not going and being done in a proper manner. So there were many audit failures in these companies as well. So that is the auditing failure that they are talking about. And there is also a lot of evidence that the public sector banks, they have a large proportion of NPS. So because this is the case, that the PSBs have a lot of high NPS, the surveys effectively says that willful defaulters have siphoned off taxpayers' money. So because PSBs, they have taxpayers' money, right? Money of you, me, and everybody in the country is in the PSBs. So all of our money was actually stolen by these willful defaulters. And the next thing is the market failure of trust, which percolated into the NBFCs. So basically, because of this failure, because of this trust failure that happened, and because the willful defaulters were running away with the money, so this thing, it percolated to the NBFC sector as well. So this is the macro reason of the NBFC crisis. And because of this, the investors in liquid debt mutual funds ran collectively to redeem their investment. It triggered panic across the entire gamut of NBFC financiers, and thereby caused a crisis in the NBFC sector. So even the NBFC sector, they can get the problems there can be linked with this kind of an issue. So they also, now the survey talks about the leading indicators of stress or impending default and the lagging indicators. Now, what is a leading indicator and a lagging indicator? So a leading indicator is basically something that can tell you about the future in an earlier manner. So if you can actually map these leading indicators, you can get a picture of the future, what is going to happen in the future. So these are very important to actually predict the future. However, lagging indicators, they are something which are historical. So lagging indicators, they cannot predict the future, but they can tell you why the thing has happened in the present. So these refer to the past. So leading refers to the future and lagging refers to the past. So leading indicators for default, these are issues in performance of business, weakness in internal controls, non-compliances of provisions of Companies Act, qualified or disclaimer of audit opinion, excess managerial remuneration. So all of these things, they can lead to default. And lagging indicators, what are these? These are default in repayment of borrowings. So once it has defaulted, you can go ahead and analyze the past, that this is the reason why this has been defaulting. So these are lagging indicators. So insufficient provisioning or impairment loss and going concern issues. So these are lagging indicators that the survey is talking about. So the next thing is the enabling trust. So avoid policies that crowd out intrinsic motivation. Now you will remember that in budget 2020 also, Nirmala Sitharaman talked a lot about trust between taxpayers and the government. So all of the events of 2011 to 13 and consequences that followed, they have created a trust deficit in the economy. So even today, we are trying to repair the trust between the government, between the banks and the other stakeholders, everybody. And that is why the survey says that trust is the glue that has traditionally bound our economy, and it is an important ingredient in our recipe for economic well-being. And the invisible hand of the market needs the supporting hand of trust. So that is the same argument that we are coming again and again into, that the market, it needs trust. So without trust, you cannot have any kind of a development. And the next thing is that the survey says that if the Indian economy in the pre-2014 era, if they had something like the CRILC, so during that credit boom, what is the CRILC? So CRILC is the Central Repository of Information on Large Credits. So they have actually made a mistake in this survey. It's not large corporates, it's large credits. This is an RBI thing. So basically all the large credits, there is a list of all of the large credits with the RBI, 5 crores and above. And in this CRILC, they are actually putting the names of all of the defaulters as well. So if something like that had been there in pre-2014 time, then the extent of the systematic NPS, they may have been a much lower amount. So that is what the survey is trying to say. And this would have limited the incremental exposure of other banks, because other banks, they would have seen that CRILC has these names, so we are not going to lend to these companies. And so the information sharing among lenders on NPS was minimal as of 2014. So later on we had the CRILC and all of these reforms so that we can identify the NPS better. So the next thing is the related issue of tagging default as a willful or genuine. So we need to tag the default, whether it is a willful default or whether it is a genuine default. We cannot go ahead and punish the genuine defaulters, right? Because only the willful defaulters should be taken to task. And so in this way, the state has a role as a competent referee. So the state should understand who are the people at fault. And in this section, the survey actually talks about a very interesting statistic. So the US FTC, the US Federal Trade Commission, it has one employee for every 2 listed firms. However, the Competition Commission of India has one employee for every 38 listed firms. Can you believe it? So we have a very high deficit of manpower. There is not enough manpower in our bodies to regulate it properly. And now the SEC, it has almost one employee for each listed company. In contrast, SEBI, it has one employee for 6 listed companies. So can you understand, even SEBI compared with the SEC, which is the Securities Exchange Commission of USA, the capital market regulator of USA, so they have so many employees, but we have very less employees as compared to the number of firms that they are managing. So in fact, one of the key divisions such as corporate finance, SEC has more than 15 times as many employees as SEBI. So this resource deficit needs to be reduced to strengthen government's role as a referee to ensure fair play for all wealth creators. So this is a very important thing that needs to be fixed right now by the Indian government, so that we can have a very good, a competent referee in the form of the state. And the SEC and the FTC, they also use artificial intelligence and machine learning. However, our regulators, as you know, they do not use these things, but we need to use those things so that we can better monitor these firms. So the next thing is the chapter at a glance. So basically this is a short summary of whatever we have read. So you can go ahead and read these things, at least if you do not want to read the entire document, but I would still tell you, read the entire thing. So this is just whatever we already talked about, and this is not so important. So moving on to the next chapter, the chapter number 2, it is entrepreneurship and wealth creation at the grassroots levels. So what did the survey find here? So in this chapter, they found that firm creation in the formal sector across all districts from the MCA 21 database. So they have confirmed that India ranks 3rd in the number of new firms created, and these new firms, they have grown up dramatically in India since 2014. And the important statistic that they found, they have listed it over here, is that the new firms in the formal sector grew at a compounded annual growth rate of 3.8% from 2006 to 2014, and the growth rate from 2014 to 2018 has been 12.2%. So as a result, from about 70,000 new firms created in 2014, the number has grown by about 80% to about 1,24,000 new firms in 2018. So as we talked about earlier, this statistic is quite important. You have to remember this number of firms. And so the entrepreneurship at the bottom of the administrative pyramid, a district, it has a significant impact on wealth creation at the grassroots level. So they have gone ahead and analyzed at the district level. So another thing is that the eastern part of India has the lowest literacy rate of about 59.6% according to the census of 2011. This is also the region in which new firm formation is the lowest. In fact, the impact of literacy on entrepreneurship is most pronounced when it is above 70%. So the eastern part of India, it is actually lagging in entrepreneurship because of its low literacy level. And there are various other stats that we will talk about in this chapter. They also talk about policies that will enable ease of doing business and flexible labor regulation, enabling new firm creation, especially in the manufacturing sector. So as the manufacturing sector has the greatest potential to create jobs for our youth. So as you can understand, manufacturing sector is very important for our economy. And again, the survey says that India has the 3rd largest entrepreneurship ecosystem in the world, and this 1,24,000 new firms in 2018, this number also you need to understand. And so comparison of the entrepreneurial activity across countries. So they have compared it across countries, and this is the interesting thing that they have seen. So USA, it's at the top. So the entrepreneurial activity of the USA, it is the highest. In the second position is Brazil, as you can see, though Brazil is going down a bit. And in the third position is our India. So India is in the third position in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that's also something very important that you must remember. And the next thing is the data and methodology box. So they have written about how they came at these figures. So these are not so much important. It's quite core economics things. And the next thing is that on a per capita basis, India has low rates of entrepreneurship in the formal economy. So this means that on a per capita basis, our entrepreneurship is not that good, because on a net basis, it is quite big because the effective number is quite high. However, the per capita number is not quite high, and a large number of India's enterprises operate in the informal economy, which is not captured in these data. So that is also quite important that we must remember. And the next thing is that growth, the entrepreneurship growth, it's particularly pronounced for the services sector. So this fact reflects India's new economic structure, that is comparative advantage in the services sector. So that is also quite important. It confirms that services sector is quite strong even in the entrepreneurship aspect. And then the survey talks about the GDDP. So this is the gross domestic district product. So as they have talked about this GDDP, this is something that is significantly influenced by the entrepreneurial activity. So entrepreneurial activity has a significant positive impact on GDDP. And before we go to this section, just let's find out the graphs. So this is the growth in the new firms over time in India. So as you can see that the growth is quite pronounced, and the growth in new firms over time in India as compared with the different sectoral things. So as you can see that services sector, the most number of new firms are in the services sector only, and manufacturing, agriculture, infrastructure, they are quite low over here in the graph. So services sector, more companies are going to be in the service sector. They are actually starting up in the service sector in our country. So that is an important statistic to remember. And now going to the GDDP. So one very important thing that you must remember from this survey is that a 10% increase in registration of new firms per district year yields a 1.8% increase in GDDP. So this is quite important, and you need to understand that this figure, it actually means that if we have new firms coming up, then the GDDP or the gross domestic district product is going to be improved, and so the districts are going to be improved. And as you can see here in this graph also, they have shown that the entrepreneurial activity, this actually impacts GDDP in a very high amount. So as you can see, the trend is towards the right, upward. And the next thing is that even though peninsular states dominate entry of new firms, entrepreneurship is dispersed across India, and it is not just restricted just to few metropolitan cities. So as you can see over here that new firms, it is actually all over India. So not just to the few metropolitan cities or the peninsular states, the states which are surrounded by water. And the next thing that the survey talks about, so there are a lot of graphs, etc., and there is a lot of maps showing many things. So these are not so important. So yeah, this is very important, that states which have the highest entrepreneurial activity in which sectors. So basically these states, Manipur, Meghalaya, Madhya Pradesh, Assam, Tripura and Odisha, these are the states having the highest entrepreneurial activity in the agriculture sector. Now, for the different states, different kinds of sectors of entrepreneurship are focused. So for Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, they are farmer producer companies designed as hybrids between cooperative societies and private limited companies. So these are the new firms, the most amount of new firms for these two states. So different states have different specializations that the survey talks about. And the next thing is the entrepreneurial activity in the manufacturing sector. So as expected, for manufacturing, the best areas are Gujarat, Meghalaya, Puducherry, Punjab and Rajasthan. And the next thing is within the manufacturing sector, they have actually said that Surendranagar, Rajkot, Bhavnagar and Surat, these are the important ones within Gujarat. So if you belong to Gujarat, it's quite important for you to know. Otherwise, you can just remember a little bit about Gujarat and that it is very good for manufacturing. And the next thing is regarding the entrepreneurial activity in the services sector. So it is the highest in the regions of Delhi, Mizoram, Uttar Pradesh, Kerala, Andaman and Nicobar and Haryana. And the next thing is the infrastructure sector. So entrepreneurial activity in the infrastructure sector, it is highest in the states of Jharkhand, Arunachal Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Mizoram, Jammu and Kashmir and Bihar. So these are the important state-wise sectoral composition of the different entrepreneurship activities. And the next thing that the survey says is that higher education levels in a district, they enable the development of better human capital that relates to increased supply of ideas and entrepreneurs. So higher education is very, very important in developing the entrepreneurs. And they will also say the percentage also, we'll come to that a little bit, and it's quite interesting. So the next thing is the proximity to large population centers. So as we understand that if they are nearer to the larger population centers, then the startups can expand operations, expand to other different markets and scale operations. So that is also quite important. And they have a summary of research. So this is a huge box. It's not quite important for us. And also the estimation. So this is a lot about the maths of the economics. These are also not important. The next thing is that an increase in the proportion of literate population in a district increases entrepreneurial activity as measured by a number of new firms in the district. Now this is quite important, and see this interesting figure, which is that the largest increases appear when literacy rises above 72%. So when the literacy rises above 72%, then we have the largest growth spurt of the entrepreneurs. And this suggests that small increases in literacy levels matter less. So when it is above 72%, then there is a huge amount of spike in the number of firms. And so this is why they are also saying that higher literacy levels and better education infrastructure are associated with greater entrepreneurship. So these are the things which you need to improve if you want to improve entrepreneurship. And the next thing is connectivity. So connectivity, how is connectivity defined in the survey? So they have defined it that the proportion of villages that are connected by tar roads in a district, this is actually called connectivity. So now the survey says that when the connectivity increases to 91%, that is 91% of the villages in the district are connected by tar roads, the number of new firms increases monotonically. However, after this threshold, the number of new firms decreases. So this is quite interesting that the results, they are a symptom of diminishing returns from physical connectivity. Now this is quite interesting because it shows that if you are increasing the connectivity of a place, of a district, when it goes up to 91%, that is the peak. So at 91%, the most number of entrepreneurs can go ahead and start their businesses. The most amount of entrepreneurship takes place. But after that, this falls. So why does it fall? It falls because when you are increasing connectivity above 91%, the competition levels might also increase. And also, beyond a point, increased levels of infrastructure development might also open up potential entrepreneurs to other opportunities. So if you have other opportunities, why would you go ahead and foray into entrepreneurship? You don't need to start a business. You can go and get a job. So many different kinds of things you can do if you do not want to follow that. And the next thing is the policy implications for fast tracking entrepreneurship and wealth creation. So what should the policy implications be? So the survey says that despite being the third largest ecosystem for entrepreneurs in the world, India appears to have lower rates of formal entrepreneurship on a per capita basis when compared to other countries. So we need to better improve our per capita entrepreneurship. And so the policy implications, what are they? So the first thing is that measures to increase the literacy levels rapidly through the institution of more schools and colleges will spur entrepreneurship and consequently local wealth creation. So you need to increase the literacy levels across the board so that the entrepreneurship can have a boost. And the next thing is governments could also explore the privatization of education to augment education capacity to all levels of education. So when you can bring more private sector people into education, then you can have a further higher boost. The next thing that they're talking about is better connectivity of villages through tar roads. So if you do that, then it will improve access to local markets and improve entrepreneurial activity. However, in terms of prioritization, this may not be as crucial as investments in education. So first priority, education. Second priority is your infrastructure and better connectivity. And the third thing is policies that foster ease of doing business and flexible labor regulation foster entrepreneurial activity, especially in the manufacturing sector. So if you try and improve your ease of doing business and you have more flexible labor regulations, then you can have a boost towards the manufacturing sector, the entrepreneurship in the manufacturing sector. So that is all about this chapter, and they have given a chapter at a glance. So I have just marked the important things that we talked about. So you must remember that new firm creation in services is significantly higher than in manufacturing, infrastructure or agriculture. So services is very important for our economy. And also about this statistic, about 10% increase in new firms, it yields a 1.8% increase in GDDP. So that is also very important. And the next thing is that the eastern part of India, it has the lowest literacy rate of about 59.6%. And because of this thing, the impact of literacy on entrepreneurship is most pronounced. So if you improve the literacy of that level, then they can have more entrepreneurs. However, it is most pronounced when it is above 70%. So if you increase the literacy only by a little bit, if it goes above 60%, say, then it will not be helping, but it has to go above 70%, and only then you can have a much better return. So that is all about chapter 2. So let's move to the next chapter, chapter number 3. So as you can see, there are a lot of different statistics given in this economic survey. Everything is not important, so you can skip over a lot of the things. So coming to chapter 3, it is pro-business versus pro-crony. So what is crony capitalism? Crony capitalism is basically when the government and private firms are in cahoots. So basically when there are some private individuals which are gaining favor from the government, that is crony capitalism basically. And pro-business policies will aim to actually decrease pro-crony policies. So crony capitalism will be decreased. So if we want to have $5 trillion economy, so again the survey keeps on telling about this $5 trillion economy. So it is a very important number as per the survey. So pro-business policy unleashes the power of competitive markets to generate wealth, on the other hand, and weaning away from pro-crony policy that may favor specific interests, specific private interests. So it will generate wealth to all the people, not only a few people. Now we have had a lot of reforms since 1991. So this has created something called creative destruction. So we will go into creative destruction a little bit later into this survey. So that is also very important concept of the economic survey that you need to understand. So before liberalization, a SENSEX firm expected to stay in it for 60 years, which decreases to only 12 years after liberalization. So before liberalization, a firm which was actually in the SENSEX, it expected to be in the SENSEX for 60 years. However, after liberalization, this decreases to just 12 years. Can you imagine? So this is the impact of competition in a market economy. And every 5 years, 1/3 of SENSEX firms are churned out, reflecting the continuous influx of new firms, products and technologies into the economy. So the pro-crony things, they destroy the value in the economy. So we need to be pro-business. And the survey also says that pro-crony policies, as reflected in discretionary allocation of natural resources, this is about the coal allocation and all of the other allocations, till 2011 led to rent seeking by beneficiaries, while competitive allocation of the same resources post 2014 have put an end to such rent extraction. So the crony lending that led to willful defaults. So those are the important things that we are getting into in this chapter. So the next thing is about the phases of the SENSEX. So first you need to understand what is the SENSEX. It is basically the free float market capitalization of 30 top companies of India, right? So basically you can go ahead and say that this is an index of the top 30 companies. So if more of these companies are in the SENSEX for a long amount of time, this means that there is a lot less dynamism in the economy. So you want that most of these firms will be churned out, that these firms will be changing. So this means that the economy is booming. There is a lot of competition, that new people are coming into business. So you understand what this churning thing means. And now we talk about the various phases of the SENSEX in India. So basically the survey says that phase 1 of the SENSEX, it was from 1999 to 2007, which saw an acceleration in the growth of the SENSEX, with each successive 5,000 point mark taking lesser and lesser time to achieve. So as you can understand, you can see this graph. So this is the incremental months taken to cross each 5,000 point milestone. So in phase 1, which has a accelerated growth, for the first 5,000, you can see number of months it took over 160 months. However, in the next 5,000, it took almost around 70 to 80 months. Then to go to 15,000, the next 5,000, it actually took about 20 months. So as you can see, it is actually decreasing. So this means that in phase 1, the Sensex was booming and very fast we were actually climbing that 5,000 points. And the next phase, which is the phase 2, which is the slowdown. So phase 2 from 2007 to 2014 saw a slowdown in the index's growth. So this phase, it actually saw a slowdown, and in December 2007 we had 20,000. To reach 25,000, we actually took almost 80 months. So as you can understand, this was a very bad phase for the Sensex, and this phase also coincides with the global slowdown in 2008. So this is the global financial crisis. So at that point of time, the entire world was badly hit, and that is why our Sensex also underperformed. And the phase 3, it began in 2014. So this is the phase 3, and the survey says this is the revival, because now we see that there is another downward trend. So it means that each 5,000 increment, it is actually taking lesser and lesser time. So 25,000 we had in 2014, 17 it came to 30,000, then 35,000 in 18, and then 5,000 was increased in just one more year. So as you can see that the speed is actually taking up. So it means that the Sensex is booming. And in phase 3, the survey also says that in this phase, the Sensex jumped from 30,000 mark to 40,000 mark in just 2 years. So this is quite important, and they say that it was not due to the base effect. So this jump, it's not because that our base was lower, it's not because of the base effect, but it is because of the higher acceleration stemmed from higher CAGR. Now here they have actually, I think, made another mistake. This will be cumulative annual growth rate, not abnormal growth rate, but it might be a typo. So CAGR, so because of the high amount of CAGR, we are getting a lot of Sensex boom. So this is not due to the base effect. So this is quite good for our economy. So that's all about this Sensex analysis. And the next thing is the various statistics. So for the first 10 years since the Sensex's inception in 1986, the firms that constituted the index barely changed. So this means that for the first 10 years, the firms were almost the same. However, after Sensex of 1997, they were steadily churned out over the next decade, so that Sensex of 2006 had barely half the firms from the Sensex of 1997. So can you understand? So fast new firms are coming, old firms are failing, and it is a very dynamic thing that is happening in our Sensex. So it means that Indian economy is booming, and this is also a very interesting graph. So the percentage of Sensex constituents retained over the next decade. So as you can understand, this is the 1986 thing. So as you can see, this blue line, almost 100% retention is there. So this means that all of the constituents in that decade, they were steady over there, so they were not getting replaced. However, from the 1997 Sensex, as you can see, in T+1 years, just in 1 year, they had almost gone down by 90% of those firms were no longer there, then 70%, 60%, 50%, and in 10 years 50% of those Sensex firms which were there in 1997, they were eliminated from the Sensex. So as you can understand that the Sensex is booming, the Indian economy is booming. So let's move to the next section. So the next section talks about the 1991 liberalization. It saw the rapid emergence of new firms, new ideas, new technologies, and new operating processes. So in 1996, half of the constituents of the index, they were replaced. So can you imagine? So there was a huge replacement going on. And the survey also says that had the liberalization not occurred, a firm that entered the index in 1986 could have expected to stay on the index for the next 60 years. So can you understand? If the liberalization had not happened, we might have had the same firms for 60 years. But because of the 1991 reforms, our markets were liberalized and the economy took off, and dynamism actually came into the Indian economy. So this is good for our economy. And right now, currently, this is also an important figure that you must remember, that currently a firm is expected to remain on the index, the Sensex, for only 12 years, 1/5 of the duration expected prior to the reforms. So as you can see, the reforms have changed Indian economy in a vast aspect. And so the survey actually asks that is this thing something that is beneficial to the Indian economy or it is not beneficial? And to answer that, they have said that SENSEX does represent a process of creative destruction rather than spurious dynamism. So this means that creative destruction is something that is good. We are going to go to the definition soon. So the creative destruction of the firms, this is actually something that is positive for the Indian economy, and this is not something that is spurious. This is not something that is fake. And so the next thing, there are a lot of data given, so these are not so much important of the revision of constituents. And the survey also talks about the sectoral things. So financials and information technology firms, these were virtually non-existent in the SENSEX of the early 1990s. However, they are responsible for more than 50% of the market share of the SENSEX today. So financials, they are extremely important. As you can see, the new sectors that emerged in the SENSEX following the liberalization. So this is the sectoral composition post liberalization as new sectors have come. So as you can see over here, that financials, they are going to be a very important part of the SENSEX. So this is what the survey is talking about. And the next thing is that the new technologies, products and services to the consumers, that have also quite increased because of these financials, the banks and the financials and the IT companies which have come into the fray. And the next thing is that the diversity of sectors in the SENSEX steadily increased over time following market reforms. So because of the market reforms, the sectoral diversity has also quite increased, and they are also saying that today's SENSEX is far less concentrated than the SENSEX of the 1980s and 1990s and mirrors the far lower sectoral concentration of the Indian economy as a whole. So it means that all of the sectors of our Indian economy, they are booming and they are not just restricted to a few sectors. And the next thing is regarding the 60% of Indian GDP which is attributable to the services sector. So as you know that our country, it is a primarily services driven economy, and so services sector is having a huge chunk of the GDP. And the number of SENSEX firms in manufacturing has reduced while those in services have increased. And today's SENSEX is not only composed of large number of sectors but also far more democratic in terms of the size of the companies. So this is also quite important that in 1991 the largest firm on the index was roughly 100 times the smallest in terms of market capitalization, but 10 years later the ratio has declined to roughly 75. In 2018 the ratio was only 12. So the largest firm, it is only 12 times bigger than the smallest firm. And the largest firm of 1991, it constituted around 20% of the market capitalization of the SENSEX, while the largest firm of 2019 contributed only 13%. So this is also quite positive for our economy. And these are quite interesting graphs. So you can see that increasing share of IT and financials in total market capitalization of SENSEX. So you can see in 2001, the IT and financials, they comprise a small chunk of the pie, but come to 2019 you see such a huge chunk of the pie is only of IT and financials. So as you can see that increasing share of IT and financials by count also. So this is by total market capitalization, and this is by count. So if you go by the count also, 2001 it was 20%, now it is 43%. So all of the companies in the financials and the IT space, they are actually booming. So the next thing that the survey talks about, it is the Herfindahl index. So this Herfindahl index, this is something that is used to understand whether there is concentration in the economy. So if you have a high Herfindahl index, it is not good. That it means that the competition is decreasing and there is a monopoly in the market. So this is used to analyze degree of competition within the two sectors, and it reveals an overall decline in the concentration in both sectors. So however, the IT sector has recently begun to show a slight increasing trend in the Herfindahl index and indicates that there is room to increase competition in the sector. So this means that the IT companies, they are big companies and they are becoming monopolies. So we need to have more IT companies in the Indian economy so that the Herfindahl index, it can get a little bit lower, and then we can have more competition in the market. And this is the Herfindahl index of financials and IT sectors. So as you can see, like they said, that in IT the Herfindahl index is actually going a bit high. However, in financials it's quite low. So the competition in financials is good. So the next thing is the policy that fosters competitive markets, hereafter the pro-business policy. So it creates a level playing field or for businesses to compete. So this is where we talk about creative destruction. So this is something that creates wealth. Now what is creative destruction? So Joseph Schumpeter, this is the person who actually coined this term. So what is creative destruction? It is described as a process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. So creative destruction brings new innovations into the market that serve people better than the old technologies they displace. It brings new firms into the markets which compete with existing firms and lower prices for consumers. So it brings dynamism in the marketplace, and that keeps the firms on their toes, and this actually helps for the entire things and the entire customers to be benefited, because creative destruction, it actually paves the way for the new firms to come into the market, and it has only one prerequisite: a pro-business policy stance that fosters competitive, unfettered markets, so that the competition can be maintained. And the difference between pro-business and pro-crony policy, so this is also something that the survey has written down, so you can go ahead and read this if you want. So pro-crony is something that we do not want, but we want pro-business, and you can read about these things. It is something that is also intuitive, so I'm not going into that. And the next thing is that when creative destruction is fostered, sectors as a whole will always outperform individual companies. So for India, we must have a pro-business policy rather than pro-crony policy. So creative destruction is something that has happened to our economy after 1991. So that is what the survey says, that because we have had this creative destruction, there have been new ideas, new processes, new companies, and they have helped our economy to grow to a large extent. So now we come to the pro-crony and the wealth destruction things. So pro-crony policies, in contrast to pro-business ones, they erode wealth in the economy, as cronyism fosters inefficiencies by inhibiting the process of creative destruction. So this is something. Now we come again to Raghuram Rajan, and this man, the name of this man will always be there in any economic document. And so Raghuram Rajan and Luigi Zingales, both of them had gone ahead and created a research where they stressed that there is a need to save the capitalism from the capitalists. And in that book, they have said that there is a lot of danger of regulatory capture by private interests. So this means that if the pro-crony people, the people who are in the cahoots of politicians, like who are actually influencing politicians, if they go ahead and they make regulations, then it can have a hugely bad impact on the economy as a whole. So we cannot allow those pro-crony people to actually influence the government. So this is quite important that you need to understand. And so basically there is a very interesting graph that the survey has put out. So what are they saying here? It's about the investor wealth generated by connected firms before and after the CAG report on the 2G scam. So what are connected firms? Connected firms are firms which are actually similar or have a connection between each other. So it is actually pro-crony firms. So the crony firms, they are the connected firms, the people who are working together to influence the government and make personal gain. So these firms, they were actually, if you see the graph, so before 2010, before the CAG report on the 2G spectrum allocation, it came out. So at that point of time, the connected companies index, so it was rising quite a lot. So all these connected people, the connected companies, they were influencing government and they were helping to make policies which are going to suit them, and they were actually getting all the benefits. But however, after the CAG report came out, it named a list of private companies that benefited from alleged collusions in the allocation of the 2G spectrum. So the 2G scam news, it broke, and after that what happened? The index of the connected companies, it went down. However, the BSE 500 index, it kept on climbing up. So as you understand, this graph, because it is going down, this means that the crony capitalists, the people who are influencing the government, who are trying to get personal gain, they were harmed quite a lot. So this means that if we go ahead and we increase the trust in the economy, and if we eliminate all these pro-crony things and go for pro-business, then these connected firms will lose, then crony capitalism will lose, and the common man will gain. So this is what they are trying to show with this graph. And the next thing is that the CAG report on the 2G allocations, this appeared to have reversed the fortunes for connected firms, just that we saw in the graph right here. And the connected index started to underperform the market starting 2011. So this means that the connected firms were losing out. So what they are showing over here is that earlier the connected index yielded an average return of 17.5% compared to the BSE index of 10.5% per annum. So these connected companies, they had outperformed the stock market by 7 percentage points. So they were actually booming, but this was on average till 2010. So from 2007 to 2010, the connected firms, they actually increased shareholder wealth by 7 percentage points more than the BSE 500 index. However, after this pre-2010, after all these scams broke out, so between 2007 and 2016, the connected firms have earned on average 7.5 percentage points lower than the BSE 500 index per annum. So they are saying that the phenomenon of rent-seeking inefficient connected firms, though unhealthy to the economy, is not unique to India. So this means that it's not unique to India. However, it is something that we need to reduce. So why is it not unique to India? To explain this entire thing, the survey goes ahead and talks about the global evidence. So this is quite interesting if you want to read it. I won't go into so much depth into it because these are not so much necessary. It's for your own interest if you want to know. So this is what they are talking about. They are talking about Ukraine. So they are talking about China, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam. So in all of these places, pro-crony capitalism things, they had actually destroyed the economic wealth of the country. So they realized that pro-business is the way forward, that we cannot go ahead and favor only small companies, only a few individuals. We have to think about the economy as a whole. So the next thing that they are saying is that the rents sought by cronies are paid for by genuine businesses and citizens who are not receiving any preferential treatment. So a transfer of wealth exacerbates income inequality in the economy. So if you have crony capitalism, income inequality increases. And they are also talking about the discretionary allocation of resources. So now we come to the coal allocation, and as you know that India has the 5th largest coal reserves in the world, behind USA, Russia, China and Australia, and coal is the most important indigenous source of energy for India, and it needs more than half of India's energy needs. So this is quite an important thing for us. However, the political clout and the preferential allocation of contracts since the 2001 to 2013, it had a very negative impact. So they talk about a lot of things here. The survey talks about a lot of things, but they basically say in the end that after close election victories, share of road construction contractors who appear affiliated to the winning politician increases. So they say that PMGSY data they had analyzed, and they found missing roads. So whenever somebody would be winning the election, those contractors, they would be getting a windfall, they would be getting a lot of profit, and they would not construct the roads as well. So this was actually harming the economy. So that is what they are showing in these graphs, and this is not so much important to note. You just need to understand the basic concept. And the next thing is that on 24th September 2014, the Supreme Court of India cancelled 214 of the 218 allocations made by the government of India over a span of 15 years. So all those coal block allocations, they were ruled out. There were various bills and acts amended because of this thing. And finally, the Economic Survey of India also found that the coal block allocation has an impact on the value of related party transactions engaged by the firms that are beneficiaries. So basically what they are saying, this entire thing, they have picked up a lot of graphs and everything. So what they are saying is that related party transactions. So related party transaction means that if I have a company and I am paying a contractor who is also working in a company that is owned by me. So these are the related party transactions. So they are saying that because they were getting these illegal allocations, they were actually increasing the related party transactions. So during the committee based allocations during the 3-year period that followed, the receipt of these related party transactions, they actually increased a lot. So as you can see in these graphs, that after the call allocations happened, the increase took place. Just see over here, all of the graphs, they are actually increasing. So this means that related party transactions are increasing, and all the wealth which they get from these illegal allocations, they are siphoning off to their own companies. So this is what is actually harming the economy. So related party transactions are not good if they are increasing suddenly after the allocations. And to unlisted foreign entities and tax havens, yeah, this is also something that increased. So after the coal allocations, the receipts, the amount that was sent to unlisted or foreign counterparties and tax havens, this also increased. Also, the one-time payments to directors like commissions, perquisites and consulting expenses, they also followed very, very high increases. And that is why the survey says that when we are following any auction-based thing, so for auction-based allocations, these kinds of things are not happening. However, we used to have the committee-based coal allocations, right? And this is where corruption started. This is where they were siphoning off the money to the tax havens, and the wealth of India was getting destroyed. So, and in case of the auction based things, we see no such increases. So we should allocate coal blocks and the natural resources via auctions and not arbitrarily. Also, they are talking about the firm productivity and the performance, and there has been a steady decline in the market share of these firms despite them getting a windfall from discretionary allocation. Now this is also quite interesting, as you can see from the graph over here, that the market share of the allottee firms, so market share is going down. Now how can this be? You are getting illegal coal allocations, but your market share is going down. Of course it will happen, because those amounts that is acquired from those illegal allocations, they are not putting into the company. That's going into their personal wealth, that is going into related party transactions, that is going into tax havens. So they are actually looting the wealth of the country. That is why the market share of those firms was going down. So as you understand, this is something that, like gaining a free resource, it should have aided firm productivity and it should have aided that business, but the business actually suffers because this is something called the Dutch disease. So in the Netherlands, what happened, that in the 1950s and 60s, they found a lot of oil. So oil resources grew, and ultimately what happened, because of that, the other sectors lost, and ultimately it was detrimental to the country. So the firms that got the free resource diverted efforts towards the tunneling of the windfall gain instead of towards productive business activity. So productive business activity did not happen. All these resources, they went into protecting their own wealth, and that is why the economy lost. And so you can understand that market share fell because of this thing, and there is no such decline in the case of competitive auctions. And this is what is called as a riskless return. So many firms in India, they enjoy profits in good times, but often rely on the state or the financiers to bail them out in bad times. So it is a one-way gamble. So this is a very interesting thing that the survey writes, that heads, the promoter wins, and tails, the lender loses. So anyway, whatever happens, the economy is going to lose. And that is why the survey says that even though they have a capacity to honor the obligations, the firms are still going into willful default, and every rupee lent to willful default constitutes an erosion of wealth. And the aggregate outstanding amount owed to willful defaulters, as you can see, this is a hugely increasing trend. So this means that willful default in our country, it is increasing, and it is something that is very bad for our economy, and it is almost 1.4 lakh crores. So can you imagine, this is the amount of willful default in India. It's a very important figure that you must remember, and this amount has been rising steadily since the early part of the current decade. And the interesting and the sad thing actually is that if this money had stayed in the economy, resulting wealth would have been equivalent in value to that needed to double the allocation towards health, education, and social protection, double the allocation towards rural development, or triple the allocation towards Narega. So the wealth destroyed, as you can see, this is the willful wealth that is destroyed, the willful defaulter who have destroyed the wealth. And as you can see, this is a huge amount, and you can see with the other sectors, if we had this in our economy, then we could have developed our economy in a better way. So now we come to the final section. So promoters are unconcerned about losing control of the company, as they may have siphoned out the money and extracted rents before the share prices collapse. So even if the company's share prices are collapsing, promoters are unconcerned. They have sent their money to tax havens, they have sent their money to foreign bank accounts, so they are not getting affected. And you can see many of these fraud people, they have left the country, and there are people who have siphoned out so much money of the Indian taxpayers. The peculiar thing is that these companies, they are net recipients of external loans and defaulters on these loans at the same time that they are net givers of loans to their related parties. This is consistent with the theory of issuing debt only to siphon the funds out of the firm for personal benefit of owners and their cronies. So people are siphoning funds out of the economy for their personal benefit, nothing else. They are only doing it for personal benefit, and that is why they are giving net loans. So even though they are defaulting on the loans that they have taken, they are in turn giving loans to their related parties. So as you can understand, this is a very sad situation, and because of all of these things, the genuine borrowers, they are forced to exit the market altogether. Because if you and I, who are genuine people, why would we stay in this system? And it is the common man who is going to lose. So the common man always loses when this kind of a thing happens. And the crony businesses, they also lobby the government to limit competition in their industry, restrict imports of competing goods, or reduce regulatory oversight. So this crony capitalism, it actually hurts the economy in such a huge number of ways. And the final thing is the conclusion, and I'll just repeat a few things. That before liberalization, a SENSEX firm was expected to stay in it for 60 years, but this decreased to just 12 years. And the next thing is that the equity index of connected firms, it significantly outperformed the market by 7% a year from 2010 to 2007 2010, and later on the index, it underperformed the market by 7.5% from 2011. So this means that we are moving towards pro business, and that pro-crony capitalism thing is going out. So finally we come to the end of chapter 3. So I know that this has been a huge session, it's been a long session. I am tired, you're tired, so we'll continue the next things in the next video. I hope that you could understand everything that I was talking about, and please go ahead and read this document. It will help you in all your exams. And if you like this video, please leave a like and share it with your friends if it was useful to you. And I promise to cover the entire economic survey. We will continue with the next section in the next videos, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.